Good morning, chaps and chapettes. So, take 3 of doing this video, and it's going to be another one about the Assaye troops that I've been painting up in 6mm. To start off with the British side, and then moving on to the Maharashtra side later on, just that I can get a sense of painting 6mm is the real reason. I know how to paint a red coat, so it seemed a logical place to start. So like last time, I'm going to do a bit of history about stuff. I'll try and keep it down under 15 minutes this time, because there's only 2 bases of figures there, so theoretically the video is shorter. So that works, right? And this time it's just going to be looking at the Kings Regiments, and then looking at these 2 particular regiments themselves. So, as discussed initially, the government was reluctant to send troops over to India, and the first regiment they sent was the 39th Foot, which we discussed in the last video. However, the company did raise 4 regiments in 1787, which were raised within the UK to fight the French, or perceived French threat, put my teeth back in, on British colonial interests within India. However, that threat never materialised. Egypt happened, I think. Is that about it? Trafalgar, one of the 2. And the regiments were absorbed into the British Army to become just King's Regiments. The government later did send troops to India, as we discussed, and by 1805 it was reported that there were up to 8,000 men belonging to King's Regiments, divided into 16 battalions, each usually with about 10 companies. So that's 8 divided, 400 men a company, 400 men a regiment. So odd numbers, I'm sure you can see. I know we obviously, regiments on paper and regiments in reality are 2 different figures, but there's reports that the 12th, 33rd and 77th were all withdrawn from frontline service in India due to a lack of able men. Now, I don't know if that means that they were brought back to the UK, or if they were just put on, rear action, rear behind the lines jobs, guarding forts and stuff. Incidentally, the 33rd were the regiment that Wellington was colonel of, and then Sharp obviously served in the 33rd in the very first book, Sharp's Tiger. The 74th were also withdrawn from frontline service later, but we're going to be talking about them in a bit, so I'll leave that for them. So there's sort of opportunity and friction between the 2 services within the Indian campaigns. So it's seen as a land of glory and opportunity for King's officers to go over there, because you win lots of battles. Sir John Burgoyne said that service in India was not less honourable than it is lucrative. So definitely suggesting that there was lots of material wealth to be found. And by example, Wellesley entered India as a troublesome second son, going into the army as generally what second sons did, but he left it as a successful general, a wealthy man, and he was an Order of the Bath. Now, at the time, there was only 60 Orders of the Bath awarded, so he was one of a very small elite group. The order is much, much bigger now, but at the time there was only 60 people. However, not all officers would find glory out there, because obviously he had the patronage of his brother, who was Governor General of India at the time. And one of those officers who didn't find success was a young ensign of the 12th called Richard Bailey. He says in his dispatches, "In no situation of the universe can a king's military officer be so uncomfortable and unprofitably unemployed. After an arduous service from 4 to 20 years, he returns to his native country with a broken constitution, unprotected and unnoticed on the half pay of a lieutenant colonel. He cannot associate with his equals in worldly knowledge, and is too proud to court the society of those with equal incomes but inferior education. So obviously, it's showing that people coming back to the UK after this service were not necessarily seen as equal as other soldiers. And there was certainly a disconnect between officers that served in India and their masters in Europe. And some officers in India were sometimes seen as to not be real soldiers because they weren't fighting against white Europeans. They were fighting against non-Europeans, and that was seen as easier as less soldiering. So that's certainly, I think in some representations of Wellington, before he starts to really get going on the peninsula, that's a bit of an opinion of him. However, when you look at the casualty lists for the battles there, especially looking at Assaye, there's a disproportionate numbers of officers who were killed or injured. And going back to Wellington, Wellesley, his horse was shot out from under him at Assaye because he was riding through gun lines and stuff. So it was very much a war of officers leading from the front. And Major Blackiston, who was a company officer, I think he was in artillery actually, he says that he considers officers serving in India, both His Majesty's regiments and company, to have a greater zeal than other officers. Obviously zeal, that thing that we're seeing in gaming, is used to show soldiers who charge forward and have more guts and glory. As discussed, India certainly made that ka-ching noise in the heads of various different officers. And that was more true for the company officers than it was for the King's officers. Because company officers were able to seek, they were there to seek financial advancement. That's why they were going. That's why they were part of the company. That was the whole point of the company. So they had varying different schemes, different things they could do, which earned them more money. Whereas King's officers were banned from doing any of that sort of stuff. And so they were bound within their own pay and within their own regulations. However, it wasn't all a bed of roses for the company officers, as their promotion structure was via seniority, and often they would find themselves sort of stuck in a rank and looking at other officers going up ahead of them in the King's regiments, even if they were younger than them, just because they could afford to buy their next rank. Whereas as a company officer, you weren't allowed to buy your next rank. In Sharp's Triumph, then there's one of the characters in that is a disgruntled company officer who's been stuck at captain, I think it is, for years and years and years, and is just fed up of it. So even the company officers who did achieve higher rank were not just free of the prejudicial opinions either, as if you were a King's officer, you trumped a company officer. So, for instance, if you're a general, well, not a general, say a colonel in the company, then a colonel in the King's service, even if he served less time, was younger than you, automatically was your superior. It's just, I think, that difference between seeing as a state army as being real soldiers. However, all the generals, as I said, not generals, but all the generals were King's officers. So the highest echelons of command there were definitely King's officers. Of course, this did cause some friction between the two services, and they weren't, as you might say, happy bedfellows. So just sort of going over a bit there about the difference between the officers, because it is very two distinct worlds clashing within, that's not even starting to mix in the whole bit with, native soldiers and native religions and stuff like that. Just the Europeans themselves were at odds. So the two regiments here, the two DD regiments, are the two that are at Assaye, and I'll just start by reading a quote. At a place called Assaye, I saw a whole army ready to run. Then a major of the 78th took a step to his front and steadied the line. That's him, Major Lennox, 78th Highlanders. And that's from Sharp's Eagle. That's from the movie about one of the characters who is fictional, but it's about a real event. Not so much, I don't think, about a major, but definitely about the 78th Highlanders who did do this astonishing task at the Battle of Assaye. So we'll have a quick look at them. And the 78th are these little chappies. In 1793, Francis Mackenzie, the chief of the Mackenzie clan, raised the 78th Highland Regiment, who were also known as the Ross-shire Buffs. The regiment served in Holland in 1794 before going on to fight at Quiberon Bay in 1795. Oddly, talking about Sharp, Hornblower goes to Quiberon Bay and is part of that. So I haven't had a chance to check my book, but I don't know if they're in there. I don't think they are. So he took part in what would be capturing a Dutch colony, whilst they were also included in the capitulation of the Dutch Navy. So you have to remember back to the first video that the Anglo-Dutch wars were massive in the seizure of India. So, there is a lot of history there to do with that. The regiment then embarked for India in 1797 and took part in the Battle of Assaye in 1803. Well, I painted them. 78th were tasked with taking the gun line of 100+ cannon that the Maharaja had assembled. And that meant that they marched through the gun line, and then the Maharajas re-seized the gun line and re-aimed it. So they had to march back and recapture the guns. So they walked into the cannon fire twice to capture those guns. And they were they have a flag, which is quite interesting, because it actually has an elephant on the top of it, which is very similar to a flag that the other regiment that served at Assaye from the Kings Regiments had. And that's these guys. And that's the 74th. So the 74th was one of the 4 regiments that I mentioned earlier that were raised by the East India Company under a Major General Sir Archibald Campbell. It was sent to India 2 years after its formation, but it wasn't to fight the French as it had intended to when it raised, but it was instead to fight the Indians. And they went as a King's Regiment, not as a company regiment, which again was how they were originally raised. So they fought in the Third Mysore War, which includes the siege of Saripington, and the regiment then fought in the Second Maharatha War, including Assaye in 1803. Every officer was killed during that battle. So every single officer in the army was killed, and the entire regiment was only rescued by a sergeant major who managed to march them out of danger. And that's why they were withdrawn from the line, because they just didn't have a regiment anymore after the officer corps was destroyed. So before returning to the UK in 1805, the company presented the 74th with a third colour. They actually have 3 flags. They don't have 2, they have 3. And one of them's an honorary one, which is an elephant. It's like a pinky beige flag with an elephant in the middle, a wreath, and then it says Assaye and Saripington on it as the 2 major battle honours. And that's them. So I'm going to be covering the Battle of Assaye in a bit more detail in a separate video, but these are the 2 King's Regiments, the 78th and the 74th Regiments of Foot, who fought alongside Wellington at the Battle of Assaye in 6mm. The figures are by Irregular Miniatures, and they're actually from their Napoleonic range, not their Battles in India range, but they're very nice. Some points to raise about them, I suppose, is I've done them in kilts. There's lots of evidence that they actually wore trousers, but if you're going to do Scotsmen, do them in kilts. That's my idea. And the flags, the company flags, you'll notice are missing the cantons in the corner, because, to be honest with you, after painting 10 of them for the Indians, I just couldn't do it. So instead, I've just given them nice bold company flags. You can see here there's the reef in the middle with the gold number, and the same here, it's the reef and the red cross with the gold number. So that's my 2 regiments, and yeah, I suppose that's it. You guys seem to be interested in the history, so I'm going to keep doing it. If you want me to shut up, just put down on the old doobly-doo, shut up, just show us the figures. But either way, you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.